HMS Faulknor served as the flotilla leader of the F-class destroyers constructed for the Royal Navy in the 1930s. She played a highly active role in the Second World War, earning 11 battle honors, and was nicknamed the hardest-worked destroyer in the fleet. Faulknor was the first vessel to sink a German U-boat, joined the Norwegian campaign, operated with Force H in the Mediterranean on the Malta convoys, escorted convoys to Russia and across the Atlantic, took part in the invasions of Sicily, Italy, and Normandy, and was present at the liberation of the Channel Islands. As the flotilla leader of the F-class destroyers, Faulknor was constructed to the same design as Exmouth, the leader of the earlier E-class, which marked a return to using an enlarged design for flotilla leaders, the most visible change being the extra 4.7-inch gun between the funnels. In size, she was only marginally larger than the other F-class ships in length, beam, and draft, though she displaced 91 tons more and carried a crew of 175 officers and ratings compared to the standard F-class complement of 145. Faulknor had a displacement of 1,499 tons at standard load and 2,040 tons at deep load. Her overall length measured 343 feet, or 104.5 meters, with a beam of 33 feet, 9 inches or 10.3 meters, and a draft of 12 feet 6 inches or 3.8 meters. She was powered by 2 Parsons-geared steam turbines, each connected to a single propeller shaft, with steam from 3 Admiralty 3-drum boilers. The turbines produced a combined 38,000 shaft horsepower, enabling a top speed of 36 knots. Faulknor reached 36.53 knots during her trials. She could carry up to 500 tons of fuel oil, giving her a range of 6,500 nautical miles at 15 knots. Faulknor was armed with 5 4.7-inch Mark IX guns in single mounts, arranged with super-firing pairs forward and aft of the superstructure, and a 5th gun positioned between the funnels. These were designated A, B, Q, X, and Y from bow to stern. For anti-aircraft defense, she carried 2 quadruple Mark I mounts, 4 half-inch Vickers Mark III machine guns on the bridge wings. The ship was also equipped with 2 above-water quintuple mounts for launching 21-inch torpedoes. She carried 1 depth charge rack and 2 throwers, initially holding 20 depth charges, which was increased to 35 shortly after the outbreak of war. Faulknor was ordered on the 17th of March 1933 from Yarrow Shipbuilders under the 1932 program, though construction of her hull was subcontracted to Vickers Armstrongs. She was laid down at their Walker Newcastle upon Tyne Shipyard on July 31st and launched on June 12, 1934 by the wife of Rear Admiral Reginald Henderson, 3rd Sea Lord and Controller of the Navy, becoming the 3rd Royal Navy vessel to bear the name. The ship was completed on May 24, 1935 at a cost of £271,886, excluding Admiralty supplied items like guns, ammunition, and communications gear. Her first commanding officer was Captain Marshall Clark, who also led the 6th destroyer flotilla of the home fleet. Following a workup period in from May to July, Faulknor entered Portsmouth for defect corrections from the 29th of July to the 21st of September before officially joining her flotilla. Faulknor, along with most of her flotilla, was deployed to support the Mediterranean fleet during the Second Italo-Abyssinian War. During this period, Captain Victor Hilary Danckwerts succeeded Clark in March 1936. She remained in the region until July 20th, when she returned to Portsmouth for a refit that lasted until October 3rd. In early 1937, she was again sent to the Mediterranean to enforce the arms embargo on both sides of the Spanish Civil War under the Non-Intervention Committee, serving there from January to March, then patrolled off Spanish ports in the Bay of Biscay for another 3 months before heading home. On August 4th, Faulknor collided with the freighter SS Clan McFadyen off Ushant and required repairs at Portsmouth until December 28th. She was then assigned to operate with the French Navy in the Mediterranean for the first quarter of 1938, before returning to Britain. In April, Captain C.S. Daniel relieved Dankwarts. The 6th Destroyer Flotilla was renumbered the 8th Destroyer Flotilla in April 1939, 5 months ahead of World War II. In September 1939, Faulknor and the 8th Destroyer Flotilla were assigned to the home fleet, operating out of Scapa Flow. During the first month of the war, she joined an anti-submarine hunting group centered around the aircraft carrier Ark Royal. On September 14th, U-39 attacked the carrier, and Faulknor, alongside her sisters Foxhound and Firedrake, sank the submarine northwest of Ireland, rescuing most of its crew. After 2 fishing trawlers were sunk near the Hebrides, the 6th and 8th Destroyer Flotilla were ordered to sweep the area on September 19th. The next day, Faulknor picked up 20 survivors from U-27 after it was sunk by other destroyers, then resumed escort duties. In mid-October, the ship suffered damage in rough seas while escorting home fleet capital ships, and underwent repairs at Scottstoun from the 15th to 28th of October. On December 4th, while escorting the battleship Nelson into Loch Ewe, the battleship struck a magnetic mine. Faulknor remained on station in case of additional mining activity. In February 1940, she helped escort convoy TC-3, which carried troops from Canada to the UK, and later rescued 10 survivors from the torpedoed freighter SS Orania on February 11th. Captain Anthony de Salis took command of Faulknor and the flotilla on February 19th. Faulknor took part in the Norwegian campaign from April to June, providing screening duties for the home fleet during the early stages. Following the Second Battle of Narvik on April 12th, Captain de Salis, commander of Faulknor and captain of the 8th Destroyer Flotilla, was appointed senior destroyer officer for the Narvik area, overseeing destroyer operations. He ordered patrols of the Ofot Fjord to assess German defenses and block submarine access. On April 16th, a landing party from Faulknor boarded the wreck of the German destroyer Z-19 Hermann Kühne in search of documents and to inspect the ship's condition. The mission found nothing of value, and 1 sailor was killed by sniper fire. The next day, Faulknor and the destroyer Zulu shelled the wreck, setting it ablaze. During this time, Faulknor came under repeated German air attacks with little damage. On April 25th, she assisted in landing troops from the 2nd Battalion South Wales Borderers at Bogan and Lenvik, and later provided gunfire support during the Allied push toward Narvik. On May 4th, Faulknor rescued 52 survivors from the Polish destroyer Grom, sunk by German bombers, and recovered the bodies of 60 more. While bombarding German positions in Rombaksfjord on May 5th, she briefly ran aground but suffered only minor damage. On her return journey for repairs, she escorted a convoy of empty troop ships. Faulknor reached Scapa Flow on May 9th and continued to Grimsby for repairs. Repairs were finished on June 12th, and a week later Faulknor escorted the battlecruiser Hood and the carrier Ark Royal, along with her sister ships Fearless and Foxhound and the destroyer Escapade from Scapa Flow to Gibraltar to form Force H. In early July, she screened the capital ships during the attack on Mers el Kabir in French Algeria. On July 11th, during Operation MA5, a cancelled carrier strike on Italian airfields in Sardinia, the destroyer escort was torpedoed by the Italian submarine Guglielmo Marconi. The explosion tore a large hole in her hull, and though efforts were made to save her, she sank later that morning after Forrester and Faulknor rescued her crew. A month later, Faulknor helped escort Force H during Operation Hurry, which flew off fighters to Malta and launched an airstrike on Cagliari on August 2nd. On September 13th, Force H joined a convoy carrying troops for an attempted landing at Dakar. 10 days later, they attacked Dakar but were repelled by Vichy French forces. In early October, Faulknor escorted a troop convoy from Freetown, Sierra Leone to French Cameroon, returning to Gibraltar afterward. In November, she escorted the carriers Argus and Ark Royal during Operations Coat and White. On November 21st, alongside the cruiser Dispatch and Forester, she intercepted the Vichy blockade runner MV Charles Plumier and escorted her to Gibraltar. Later that month, she took part in Operation Collar, escorting Force F to Malta, and was involved in the inconclusive Battle of Cape Spartivento on November 27th. The next month, Faulknor covered another Malta convoy and responded to convoy WS-5A after an attack by the German heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper. In early January, Faulknor screened Force H during Operation Excess. Later that month, she and Forester temporarily relieved some of the escorts assigned to convoy WS-5B, which was bound for Egypt via the Cape of Good Hope, and remained with the convoy until it reached Freetown. Before arriving on January 26th, the two destroyers were officially detached from Force H and reassigned to bolster the Freetown escort force. On February 3rd, Faulknor rescued 4 survivors from the tanker SS British Premier, who had been adrift at sea for 41 days. Their time in Freetown was brief, as they were soon ordered to escort convoy SL-67 and the battleship Malaya back to Gibraltar in late February. On March 8th, the slow-moving convoy came under attack from 2 German U-boats, which sank 5 ships. The destroyers rescued some of the survivors. Later that day, the German battleships Gneisenau and Scharnhorst sighted the convoy, but Admiral Gunther Lütjens chose not to engage upon spotting Malaya. Force H joined the convoy 3 days later, and Faulknor and Forester returned to Gibraltar on March 16th. Faulknor spent most of the remainder of the month undergoing a refit. From the 2nd to 4th of April, Faulknor led the escort group for Ark Royal as the carrier launched additional fighter aircraft bound for Malta, a mission repeated 3 weeks later. In early May, she was one of 6 destroyers screening the battleship Queen Elizabeth and the light cruisers Naiad, Fiji, and Gloucester as they joined the Mediterranean fleet. This movement was part of Operation Tiger, which involved transporting tanks to the Middle East via a supply convoy and redeploying warships. To support the operation, Faulknor and the other F-class destroyers were equipped with 2-speed destroyer sweep minesweeping gear, enabling them to operate as fast minesweepers during the passage to Malta. Despite these precautions, 1 merchant ship was sunk and another damaged by mines. Later in May, Faulknor took part in Operation Splice, another club run in which the carriers Ark Royal and Furious launched more fighters to reinforce Malta. On the 24th of May, Force H was ordered to help escort convoy WS-8B in the North Atlantic, following the Battle of the Denmark Strait on May 23rd. However, by May 25th, the group was redirected to join the hunt for the German battleship Bismarck and Prince Eugen. Rough seas caused increased fuel consumption among the escorts, and Faulknor was forced to return to Gibraltar to refuel that same day. She rejoined Force H on May 29th after the final battle and sinking of Bismarck. In early June, Faulknor took part in 2 more aircraft delivery missions to Malta, Operations Rocket and Tracer. On June 16th, after several German blockade runners made it to France, Force H deployed into the Atlantic to search for others. Alongside Fearless, Foresight, Forester, and Foxhound, Faulknor helped sink U-138 on June 18th. 4 days later, the 8th Destroyer Flotilla was sent to intercept a German supply ship headed for the French coast. The next day, they encountered the MV Ulstertor, which was scuttled by her crew. British ships rescued 78 British POWs who had been captured by German raiders, as well as the crew of the Ulstertor. Later in June, Faulknor again screened Ark Royal and Furious during Operation Railway, another mission to fly off fighters to Malta. During a Malta supply run, Faulknor came to the aid of Fearless on July 23 after the latter had been disabled and set ablaze by Italian torpedo bombers. Despite efforts to save her, Fearless could not be safely towed to Gibraltar and was scuttled by Forrester with torpedoes. A week later, Faulknor screened Force H's capital ships during another Malta convoy, Operation Style. On the return trip, she suffered turbine failure, managing to reach Gibraltar only after the port turbine was temporarily repaired. Inspection showed that blades in the starboard turbine had fractured. Lacking both spare parts and suitable lifting gear at Gibraltar, the dockyard ordered her back to Britain for a full refit. Though restricted to a top speed of 18 knots, she served as the senior ship for convoy HG-70, which arrived safely at Londonderry on August 16 without loss. 2 days later, she entered refit at Southampton, which was completed on November 9. Following completion of her refit, Faulknor was reassigned to the home fleet at Scapa Flow and led the escort for the battleship Duke of York as she carried Prime Minister Winston Churchill to meet U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt during the Atlantic Conference in mid-December. While en route, both Faulknor and Forsyth sustained damage from heavy seas and were forced to break off the mission, seeking shelter in the Azores, Portugal, before eventually returning to Scapa Flow on the 23rd of December. On January 27, 1942, Captain Alan Scott Moncrief took over command from De Salis. Faulknor was then assigned to home fleet duties, escorting convoys bound for Russia. In February, Scott Moncrief led the close escort for convoy PQ-910 and the return convoy QP-7. While supporting the covering force for convoy PQ-12 in early March, Faulknor was diverted to assist the damaged light cruiser Sheffield, which had struck a drifting mine. After escorting Sheffield to Seyðisfjord, Iceland, Faulknor rejoined the covering force on March 9, shortly before it turned back to Scapa Flow. Several days later, she led a destroyer sweep off the Norwegian coast in an unsuccessful search for the German battleship Tirpitz, returning to Scapa on March 14. Following repairs for weather-related damage, Scott Moncrief once again led the escort for the covering force of convoy PQ-13 and the return convoy QP-9 at the end of the month. On April 1st, Faulknor led a group of 5 other destroyers tasked with escorting 10 Norwegian merchant ships attempting to escape from Sweden to Britain via the Skagerrak. The Germans were prepared for the breakout, managing to damage or sink 6 of the ships and forcing 2 others to turn back. Under attack from the Luftwaffe, Faulknor sank the burning SS Rigmor after her crew had been rescued by another destroyer. As usual, she led the escorts for the distant covering forces of several Arctic convoys, encountering little beyond severe weather. On July 13th, Faulknor began a refit at a shipyard in Hull, which lasted until August 27th. Faulknor received a Type 285 fire control radar and a Type 286 PQ surface warning radar during her refit. A 3-inch high-angle gun replaced the 4.7-inch mount in the X position, and her aft torpedo tube mounting was also replaced. She resumed convoy escort duties in September, screening convoy PQ-18 and sinking U-589 south of Spitsbergen on September 12. In October, she escorted the returning convoy QP-15, followed by convoy JW-51A in December. Her Arctic escort duties continued into 1943, including convoy JW-52 in January, JW-53 in February, and RA-53 in March. In April, Faulknor and her flotilla were detached to form the 4th Escort Group for North Atlantic convoy protection, during which she helped escort convoys. In June 1943, Faulknor rejoined the 8th Destroyer Flotilla for fleet duties in the Mediterranean, arriving in Alexandria on July 5 to take part in the Allied invasion of Sicily, Operation Husky. She served as part of the screen for the covering force in the Ionian Sea, which included 2 aircraft carriers, 3 battleships, and 4 cruisers, along with 17 other Allied destroyers. Following screening and patrol duties in August, Faulknor supported the Allied invasion of Italy during Operation Baytown and at Salerno in Operation Avalanche, operating alongside destroyers from the 4th, 8th, and 24th flotillas. She was then assigned to a group of destroyers that escorted ships carrying the Italian fleet to Alexandria via Malta, before being transferred to the eastern Mediterranean to assist in the Dodecanese campaign. During this period, she transported troops to Leros, conducted patrols, sank multiple cargo vessels and landing craft, and bombarded enemy shore positions before the operation was called off in November. In December, Faulknor supported military operations along Italy's west coast, escorting the landing ships Royal Ulsterman and Princess Beatrix, which carried No. 9 Commando for a landing north of the Garigliano River during Operation Partridge, followed by diversionary shore bombardments. In January 1944, she participated in the Anzio landings, Operation Shingle, where she provided naval gunfire support and anti-aircraft cover during the initial assault, then continued to serve as a patrol and escort vessel through March. In April 1944, Faulknor returned to Scapa Flow to prepare for the Normandy landings, Operation Neptune, joining 10 other destroyers in Force J of the Eastern Task Force to bombard beach defenses west of La Rivière. On April 27th, she sailed to the Solent for pre-invasion exercises. Faulknor departed for Normandy on June 4th, but was recalled when the operation was delayed by 24 hours. On the 5th of June, she sailed with Convoy J1, which included the 9th Minesweeping Flotilla, 4 Danlayers, a harbor defense motor launch, and the 1st Division of the 159th BWEMS Flotilla. On D-Day, she provided naval gunfire support off Juno Beach before returning to Portsmouth later that day to re-ammunition. On June 7th, Faulknor returned to Normandy carrying General Sir Bernard Montgomery, commander of Allied land forces, to establish his tactical HQ ashore. At Montgomery's insistence, the ship approached as close as possible to the beach and ran aground on a sandbank, requiring a tug and the next high tide to be refloated. She then resumed duties including patrols, anti-aircraft defense, and ferrying. On the 24th of June, she embarked First Sea Lord Admiral of the fleet Andrew Cunningham, Second Sea Lord Admiral Algernon Willis, Naval Secretary Admiral Cecil Harcourt, and Lord Privy Seal Lord Beaverbrook at Portsmouth for a visit to the assault area. While there, she flew the flag of Admiral Bertram Ramsay, Allied Naval Commander, during a visit from U.S. Naval Commander Admiral Alan G. Kirk. The ship returned to Portsmouth the same day with her distinguished guests. Montgomery's repeated orders for Faulknor to move closer to shore led to damage to her sonar sensor, which was located beneath the hull. As a result, she was released from duty in July and sent to Grimsby for repairs. In September, she was redeployed for support and convoy defense operations in the English Channel, and in October joined the 14th Escort Group based at Milford Haven, operating in the Irish Sea, the Channel, and the southwest approaches. In December, Faulknor rejoined the reformed 8th Destroyer Flotilla at Plymouth, tasked with protecting Channel convoys. On May 8, 1945, she accepted the surrender of the German garrison at St. Peter Port, Guernsey, and on May 17, escorted 6 German minesweepers and 2 patrol boats back to the UK. On the 6th of June, she escorted the cruiser Jamaica, which was carrying King George VI on a visit to the Channel Islands. In July, Faulknor was reduced to reserve status and destored at Plymouth before sailing to Dartmouth to decommission on the 25th. She was placed on the disposal list in December 1945 and sold on the 21st of January 1946 to Biscoe for scrapping at Milford Haven. After being stripped of her remaining equipment at Plymouth in March, she was towed to the breaker's yard, arriving on April 4, 1946. A quiet end for a legendary ship.